Nick Saban just finished his career with 6 national championships, retiring from Alabama in one of the great careers of all time in any sport. But which national championship game was his best? We're going to take you through the wins today. We're going to rank them, the 6 wins, top to bottom. Hard to do. They all had a lot of history to them, but we're going to sort them out coming up.
This is Distant Replay.
The Replay YouTube channel. Glad to have you here. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. We're trying something a little bit different today. We usually have some true crime, talk about old games, but I want to go back and look at Nick Saban's career and his national championship wins specifically. Now that he stepped away from Alabama, he's playing golf down in Jupiter. Want to go back and rank the best wins that he had while at Alabama. Of course, you can go back and debate the best teams. He had a lot of great ones, some really good teams that didn't win championships, but I want to actually rank the games themselves. So we're going to talk about the game itself. We're going to rank those wins by the best matchups, best games. It might not be the best teams necessarily that we rank top to bottom, just the games themselves. I was fortunate enough to be at every single one of these national championship games, so have a firsthand experience seeing all these in person, which will weigh into my rankings as well. So let's jump right into it. Let's start off 2012, the Alabama national championship team. Of course, this game was played in Miami, the 2013 BCS national championship game. It was a 42-14 win over Notre Dame. Now, most people forget about this game, the fact that Notre Dame came in number 1 in the country, undefeated. Alabama, having come off a national championship win the year prior, was the betting favored, but still the lower-ranked team going into this matchup. This one had all the pomp and circumstance, right? You had Notre Dame and Alabama, 2 of the winningest teams in college football, 2 of the best teams from a national championship perspective as well. And Notre Dame, remember, they had a long drought kind of leading up to this. And this team and this program was hungry to be on this national stage once again, and they were there. They were there in Miami with a chance to win it, and their fans were pretty confident in the tailgating ahead of that game. They felt pretty good, thought they had a pretty good chance to go in, but little did they know what was coming. Now, let me add a few things that were really good about this game, okay? Why I like this game a lot. Now, it is the last ranked 6 out of the 6 national championship games that Alabama played in, but there was still a lot to take away from this. So, first meeting since 1987 between these two schools. This is also the first time Alabama went back-to-back. The only time Alabama went back-to-back under Nick Saban, which is hard to believe. It happened early on in his tenure. Alabama picked up the second win, 3 and 4 years for Alabama with this win. Now, you go back to this one, and it wasn't super competitive, but what I remember the most, first drive, Alabama goes down, I think 5 plays, just a couple of minutes, 2 or 3 minute drive. Eddie Lacy caps one off. I think this Sports Illustrated cover that we all have seen with him running into the end zone, the spin move, the bouncing off Notre Dame defenders. They couldn't tackle him. That set the stage for what was to come. Notre Dame could not match up with Alabama. It was as simple as that. And I think the Alabama fans knew that after the opening drive. And of course, you had the incredible and the epic soundbite from Notre Dame head coach Brian Kelly. Now you hear that, and obviously you know that this team is not coming back out and going to compete. They know it's over. It's only halftime, but they know it's over. And Alabama would go on to roll in that game, and just an incredible game. A lot of fun to spend that time down there with my brother watching that game and just being a part of that. Traffic was awful getting out of that game. One of the worst places to get out and get public transportation or pick up an Uber. Just getting out of there was tough. So that's a little mark against the Orange Bowl. All right, now moving on. Number 5. Now, this one might surprise you a little bit. And again, this is tough to rank. I mean, try to rank these national championships is extremely difficult. And this is a perfect example. Now, 2020, Alabama, 52-24 win over Ohio State in the college football playoff in Miami. Now, this is the team that everybody will probably tell you was Nick Saban's best. Plenty of reason to point to that. The second undefeated team ever for Nick Saban. Of course, they did it against all SEC opponents in that COVID year. Remember, they had to have different rules, teams and conferences playing by different rules, players out. They wanted to try to keep it contained as much as possible, so they only played conference games. So that made it even more impressive that Alabama went undefeated throughout and then went into this national championship game against an Ohio State team that had a very shortened season, but went in and just dominated that game against the Buckeyes. And it was all about offense. This was peak offense for Alabama. Mac Jones, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, Najee Harris. I mean, this just overall was an incredible team. Now, you have to remember, this could have been probably much worse. I mean, 52-24 is pretty bad, but you had Devontae Smith putting on an all-time college football performance in the first half. 12 catches, 215 yards, 3 touchdowns. Again, all in the first half. And that was before, of course, he got injured early in the third quarter. Didn't play the rest of the way. Didn't matter. Alabama rolled. Mac Jones, 36 completions, 464 and 3 touchdowns. Now, the reason why this is probably a little bit lower on the list, and this game was a great matchup too, because you had 10 of the 11 offensive starters for the Buckeyes all went on to get drafted in the NFL. The only guy that wasn't drafted, Matthew Jones, and he's actually still playing on that team as of 2023. Maybe he ends up getting drafted, and that entire offensive starting lineup will go on to get drafted, but Matthew Jones finishing up his 6th year with the Buckeyes. But the reason why this game is down the list in terms of the best championship games, obviously it was lopsided, 52-24, but also COVID. One of the worst experiences in terms of being a fan was at this game. I think they didn't even open gates until the parking lot, until like an hour or 2 hours out. I think 2 hours out. So you literally couldn't tailgate. Remember all the COVID precautions? We couldn't go out and tailgate and be around each other outside in the open. I mean, that was how bad it was for that game. So you didn't have tailgating, right? Everybody was there. You had to wear masks throughout the stadium. You remember a lot, you seeing Nick Saban, I think, in his picture with his mask on at the game. But you had to wear masks. Not only that, they had distancing in the stadium, so it wasn't a full capacity stadium. They had blocks of seats. You couldn't be close to people. All ridiculous in retrospect, but it just took away from the atmosphere. There weren't bands at the game. The bands didn't travel. So the atmosphere was not great, really, in terms of any college football matchup, but especially for that game because you had two great programs playing against each other in a national championship game. And it's kind of disappointing now in retrospect because turns out that was Nick Saban's last national championship win, and he went out that game and had to do that in front of I think it was maybe 2/3 of a full capacity, maybe 55%. I don't remember exactly. But in that game, though, Nick Saban did pass Bear Bryant for 7 national championships won total as a head coach, which was the best all time. But really a great game to remember, but still not great because of COVID. All right, number 4 on the list, 2012. Now, again, if you're ranking national championship teams, the last one would probably be number 1. This one might be number 2 on your list, and that was, of course, the Alabama team with that all-time defense going against an LSU team that matched up pound for pound, beat them in the regular season 9-6. The teams rematched in the BCS National Championship game in New Orleans in LSU's backyard. Probably the toughest ticket I've ever tried to track down for any of these games was probably that one. As you can imagine, LSU, Nick Saban returning home to play his team. LSU had already won the previous matchup. It was the rematch in the national championship game, which was unprecedented as well. It was in New Orleans in the Sugar Bowl. I mean, all these factors played into it being an epic game, but more importantly, the toughest ticket to get in. We were there. We were inside. Heck of a game. But the reason why this one's not high on my list, just because it wasn't a wonderful game to watch if you were a football fan, right? As an Alabama fan, sure. You love seeing LSU fail to get past the 50-yard line, only being able to manage 5 first downs for the game. That was pretty awesome. But when these two teams played that year, Alabama, of course, 9-6 the first matchup, overtime. This matchup, Alabama kicked 5 field goals to start this game before scoring a touchdown with under 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter by Trent Richardson to put this one away 21-0. You forget about that because the score looks 21-0. Oh, a couple, 3 touchdowns, whatever. But it took over 125 minutes between these two teams playing for there to be a touchdown scored. Now, it does speak to how good those defenses were. But again, if you're an outsider watching this game, probably not your favorite matchup of them all. I know a lot of complaining. It was a fun game to be a part of because of what it meant, right? The history behind that game. But actual gameplay itself, maybe not the best. Trent Richardson finished with 96 yards rushing. Jordan Jefferson, the quarterback for LSU, 53 yards passing and an interception. Again, these two teams featured stack lineups top to bottom. Defensive players being drafted in the first 3 rounds. These two teams were loaded with those guys. But that 21-0 win, while historic, one of the best teams Nick Saban ever put together, not the best game in terms of national championships that he won. All right, let's go to our top three now and begin with number three. Let's go back to Nick Saban's first national championship, 2009. The 37-21 win over Texas in the BCS championship game. That game, of course, played in the Rose Bowl. Now, this game could have been down a little bit further in the list. Maybe depends on how you weigh the different factors. For me, being there at this game, this was Alabama's return to glory. This was Alabama's return to the big stage. And you could not have drawn up a better script. The Rose Bowl, beautiful, perfect weather, blue skies, mountains in the backdrop. Texas on the other side, a team that had been in the top of college football, top nationally for a number of years under Mac Brown. It was the perfect stage set for this game. Now, of course, you had the Colt McCoy injury. Maybe the game on paper, 37-21, doesn't seem like the most competitive game, but it was a good game. It was back and forth. Texas got off to a good start. Alabama bounced back, and it was an electric atmosphere, of course. And it was a storybook finish to Nick Saban's first national championship at Alabama. It was the perfect way to go out. Two blue bloods going against each other. First Alabama Heisman winner, and Mark Ingram was on that field, scored as well. And the game capped off only the second 14-0 team in college football, behind Ohio State, who did it a handful of years earlier. But it was also a weird game. Alabama didn't score in the first quarter. Texas didn't score in the second quarter. Alabama didn't score in the third quarter. Both teams scored in the fourth. But of course, all big games have memorable plays that stick with you for a long time. This one had a few of them. Colt McCoy's injury, the Marcel Darius interception return for a touchdown right before half, and of course, Eric Anders' sack fumble late in that game. Three of the more memorable plays in the Saban era, honestly, when you think about it, came out of this game. And it was just a dramatic finish and just a great way to begin the Saban era in terms of championships. So this one ranks number three for me. The Rose Bowl itself, not great in terms of efficiency. If you try to go to the concession stands, it's just the logistics there are not wonderful. Makes for a little bit of a disappointing experience in that regard, but still, this is one of the best settings. So fortunate to be a part of this one, to see Alabama and Texas square off. All right, down to the top two. Number two national championship win for Nick Saban at Alabama, 2015 national championship, 45-40 win over Clemson. Remember that one? That was an all-time classic. I mean, this one, I went back and forth on whether I should put this one number one, because this game was probably the best game start to finish of any of them. It was two dynamic teams who had some incredibly good players on both sides of the ball. The atmosphere in Glendale was incredible. Clemson's return, their first time in the national championship game, their fans, you've seen them, they turned out leaving $2 bills all over Glendale. And this was the first of four straight meetings in the college football playoff between Alabama and Clemson. We didn't know that at the time. This was the beginning of what became a pretty intense rivalry there for a few years. Only 14 of the 44 starters didn't get drafted in this game. Alabama, 16 of their 22 got drafted, of course, led by Derrick Henry as being the big name there with 2,000 yards rushing that year. This game, again, you talk about games being memorable, being top of the list, you think about big plays. This game had it too. And they all pretty much came in the fourth quarter. Now, it was a good game start to finish, but this fourth quarter was worth the time to go back and watch. If you have a free 15, 20 minutes, want to go back during the offseason, check a game out, check out this fourth quarter if you haven't seen it. You have, I'm sure. But if you haven't, go back and watch it again, relive it, because it was incredible. 24-16. That was the score in the fourth quarter, but three huge plays. The onside kick that Nick Saban drew up, Adam Griffith to Marlon Humphrey. Then you got the O.J. Howard long touchdown catch. And, of course, maybe my favorite play of all time in these championship games. Of course, you're going to have the ones that you're going to put top of the list, which we'll get to. And there's many people have some of the same ones. But I still think the Kenyon Drake kickoff return for a touchdown in that fourth quarter to put Alabama back up by 2 scores was as good as it gets. And that happened right in front of the Alabama crowd in that corner right there on the left side of the field. Just an all-time beautiful return. And Kenyon Drake, one of the more underrated players at Alabama, kind of did it all. He's had a good NFL career as well, but such a fun player to watch. And for him to have that moment on that stage was just tremendous for him and a lot of fun to see. And it just was one of those big plays that you always hang on to and remember. And maybe my favorite play of all time out of the Alabama National Championship games. And let's not forget, too, with that Alabama team, the all-time coaching staff. You had Lane Kiffin as the OC. You had Kirby Smart as the DC, which obviously that was the best, I think the best coaching staff trio that Alabama put together. Kirby's last year, of course. But you even go back to that roster, and I think a picture floated around on social media during this last Nick Saban season that had all these guys together. But you had Saban, Burton Burns, the running backs coach, Lane Kiffin, Bo Davis, defensive line, Kirby Smart, defensive coordinator, Mario Cristobal, offensive line, Billy Napier, wide receivers coach, Tosh Lupoi, outside linebackers, Bobby Williams at tight ends, Scott Cochran, strength and conditioning, and Mel Tucker with assistant head coach and defensive backs coach. So a ton of head coaches that were on that staff, and the reason why that team was so good. And probably when you look back at it, I think you could argue that the following year, Alabama probably should have won the national championship against that Clemson team, but you could also probably argue that Clemson might have won this game. Probably should have won this game, had the better team. Potentially, you can make that argument. Alabama had to make some tremendous plays and special teams in order to pull it off. So that was just the first of two great matchups between these two teams and 3 championship appearances. Now our final national championship game, number 1 on the list, of course, has to be Alabama and Georgia, 2017, the championship game played there in Atlanta. Arguably the greatest finish in college football history. That's why it's on top of the list, right? 2nd and 26, Tua's throw to Devontae Smith, maybe the greatest finish of all time. And it matched up 2 great teams. You had Nick Saban versus his protege and Kirby Smart. It looked like the Dogs had turned the corner, had maybe got the best of Alabama, had figured him out, and was ready to pull off the upset, begin the changing of the guard. But Nick Saban went into his bag, pulled out this young freshman, Tua Tagovailoa, at halftime of a national championship game, sat Jalen Hurts down because Alabama was down 13-0 in the first half. They couldn't stick with Jalen Hurts any longer. And for Nick Saban to make that move at halftime speaks to why he's so great. He was always able to make adjustments while others around him in college football probably would not have had the cojones to make that move. He did it in that matchup, put 2 in. Tua went on to throw 3 touchdowns in the second half and lead Alabama to a comeback. Alabama had a chance to win this game in regulation. Got down the field and had a 36-yard field goal for the win. Of course, Papanastis misses that 36-yarder. They go to overtime. You had Georgia kick the 51-yarder to start things off. Did not look good for Alabama. Of course, the sack, 16-yard loss by Tua, and then the throw down the field to Devontae Smith for the walk-off touchdown. Maybe one of the best reactions, probably the best reaction by Nick Saban ever in a game, for him to show sincere and true happiness and excitement running on the field, throwing his headset off, celebrating with the team. He couldn't believe it. We couldn't believe it. And that game, not only a remarkable place to be inside that Mercedes-Benz Stadium early on when it was first opened up, for that matchup, for those 2 teams, Nick Saban goes in again into somebody else's backyard. Now, granted, Alabama's very familiar with Atlanta. We know that SEC championship game. They won a lot of those there. But still, to go in the backyard of Georgia with all their fans in attendance for that game and to walk out of there, having made that move at halftime to put a freshman quarterback in against this Georgia team, still takes the cake for the greatest national championship win and game for Nick Saban at Alabama. So there you have it. Alabama's 6 national championships under Nick Saban. They were all great. It's hard to rank them. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you put number 1? What did I have too high? What did I have too low? Would love to hear from you. But we appreciate you watching. This has been Distant Replay. Let's try to do it.